If I could ask everybody to start to take your seats, we're going to start our afternoon session here in just a minute. Okay, welcome back from lunch, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start up our afternoon. Our first item on this afternoon's agenda is a discussion regarding the Sturgeon framework. And I'm going to turn things over to Jason Didden to provide us the presentation. Then we'll have a discussion after that. Go ahead, Jason, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to give credit to the New England staffers, Jenny Couture and Robin Preedy, who helped, who did a lot of the legwork of this presentation. And basically, the New England Council saw the same presentation last week. So, primary thing for today, looking for the council to review and endorse the packages of alternatives that have been put together by the FMAT/PDT. The joint action with New England Mid-Atlantic, so the Fishery Management Action Team, Land Development Team, FMAT, PDT, took what the councils had previously done, crafted them into a couple packages for further consideration and analysis. So just big picture wise, we have the 2021 BIOP still active. It instructed that bycatch had to be reduced in federal largemouth gillnet fisheries by 2024 to some degree. It didn't specify exactly how much. We had then a biological opinion, a new one, reinitiated because these fisheries exceeded their incidental take statement, the numbers that they're allowed to catch. They wouldn't be able to operate without this ITS statement that allows them to have some interactions. So that's kind of how we got here. Now, the service, when they're doing this new BIOP, new biological opinion to determine jeopardy for sturgeon, they'll take into account, there's a sturgeon assessment going on right now, and then they will also take into account the actions that the councils recommend and NIMS eventually hopefully implements, whether or not jeopardy may be at risk. So the FMAT took the council's previous work, and there are like thousands of potential combinations of alternatives from what the councils had previously provided input. And we basically boiled it down to 4 packages, and high to low impacts, and also 1 gear only package to try to kind of craft from a NEPA perspective a reasonable range, which in NEPA language kind of means a wide range of alternatives to further consider. So we've got, again, 5 alternatives, no action, plus these 4 action alternatives, 2 being the most impactful, 3 and 4 subsets of what's in 2, and then alternative 5 is the gear package. These are the 3 areas that we'll talk about a good bit. We've got a Southern New England one, a New Jersey one. The New Jersey one is the same for monkfish and spiny dogfish. There's a lot of overlap, so to try to keep things simple, we just kind of set one same area. And then a Delmarva, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia one that's really 2 separate areas. It was based on where we were seeing the most takes. So, you know, for those areas, how did the FMAT come up with those areas? Well, we looked at the takes that occurred 2017, 18, 19, 21, and 2022. We've been taking out 2020 because of disruptions with observer coverage because of COVID. Then we just looked at where the takes were occurring at a 10-minute square block. And then we built those polygons around the takes and around the 10-minute squares. Now, the tricky thing is we cannot display the actual takes or the 10-minute squares because we get into confidential data. But what we can do is translate those into quarter-degree squares, which is what you see here. So these quarter-degree squares are where those takes occurred. We built the polygons around the actual takes and the 10-minute squares that had the highest amounts of takes, but we can't show those because of confidential data. But we can translate those 10-minute squares into quarter-degree squares, and that's the heat map that you see here that has the monkfish polygons overlaid here, and then the dogfish polygons overlaid here. So we went from takes to 10-minute squares to build the polygons, but we can't display that because of confidential data. But we translated those 10-minute squares into quarter-degree squares to give you a sense of the intensity of takes and how they overlap the polygons that were ultimately created. So alternative 1, no action, it's always in for NEPA purposes, but if the councils didn't do anything, NIMS would be forced to take some action on its own because it's in the BIOP as a reasonable, prudent measure to maintain adherence to ESA requirements. Something has to be done to reduce sturgeon take to some degree under the current biological opinion. So alternative 2, and gone through the document itself, it's a series of closures, and this is for monkfish and dogfish, those monkfish and dogfish polygons, and they are the times of the years when we saw the most sturgeon intakes, both for monkfish and dogfish. And for alternative 3 and then alternative 4, we just started focusing on the times of the year that had the highest takes. So the closure times are compressed as you move to 3 and 4, really focusing on the times of the year that have the most takes. So the duration of the closures gets smaller. And then there are also some gear measures built in there, and we can dig into that if folks want more clarification. But that was the general kind of sense. Start it fairly broad and then start targeting down into the times of the year that had the most intense takes. Then alternative 5 was a gear-only sturgeon package, looking at requiring some monkfish low-profile gear and some overnight soak prohibitions in the times of the year when we saw the most takes. Just some details on the low-profile gillnet definition came out of some previous cooperative research that had been done, some studies on a gear type that appears to reduce sturgeon takes. It's only for the New Jersey one because there's some work and done in New York that it didn't have as good performance for the targeted species. So it's only proposed for New Jersey, where it had both retaining most of the targeted species and reducing sturgeon. Just some more details on the studies that indicated this low profile gear could be a good option. They saw a 76% reduction in sturgeon bycatch and no significant difference in the monkfish catch rates off New Jersey. But there was significantly fewer monkfish caught in New York. So that's why there's only the New Jersey polygon associated with the low profile gear. In terms of the overnight soak rationale, previous work has shown that if you have soak times under 16 hours, you tend not to have mortalities. And so that's the rationale behind having no overnight soaks as a potential alternative here. You also have less gear, gear in the water for less amount of time, so you're going to have less takes also. Okay, so a few other updates of things to keep in mind in the background. So we have Atlantic large whale take reduction activities. We took a model that was created for that work, applied it to these closure areas to try to get a sense of what might happen if these closure areas were enacted. Seems like overall you have a lot of gear that gets relocated adjacent to the closed areas. If you have a 20-mile maximum on how far gear might travel to find some new area, you get a relatively high amount of the gear that was in those areas stops fishing. But it doesn't appear to have a huge impact on overall gillnet fishing coast-wide. So the overall impact for sturgeon might not be that high, even with the closure areas. That's a thing that the FMAT's working on. We don't have those analyses today, but we'll have those for the committee meetings and AP and committee meetings in March. There's a FMAT PDT meeting later in February where we're going to finalize those analyses. We did have some, Garfo sponsored some informal industry meetings to try to get a sense of how well that decision support tool was predicting what might happen to the fishing effort with some of those closures. The feedback we got was that it seems like it's a gross simplification of what might actually happen. But when you constrained it down to that 20 vessels would, if they couldn't find a suitable area to replace within 20 miles, that they would stop fishing. That some of the reduction in efforts with effort that had been in those polygons was kind of seemed like in the ballpark. So we're kind of carrying that forward for some additional analyses. Again, the AP and committee will see those in March. Just flagging, there were some entire statistical areas that weren't previously under consideration, but the council's removed those in the last iteration as they've been too broad. A couple research priorities the council's added, looking at data loggers to enforce gillnet soak times, and potentially extending the low profile gear to spiny dogfish or southern New England, but we don't have that information at the current time. The low profile gear has a twine size that would run afoul of some harbor porpoise regulations. So the councils, I think, will be sending a letter to Garfo asking for some kind of exemption or modification of those rules. So that's kind of will be occurring in parallel as Garfo is considering implementing whatever the councils recommend. they'll be working on trying to make it consistent with harbor porpoise regs at the same time. So just a refresh on the overall timeline here. I put a star where we're at. So the New England Council looked at this last week, basically said, we have a lot of concerns about this, but we understand the requirements of the Endangered Species Act and our timeline here. So keep moving forward with the alternative packages as you have, and bring them to the committee in AP in March, and then still plan on final action in April, because that's when the councils have to take final action to meet that Endangered Species Act BIOP requirement to implement something in the 2024 timescale to reduce sturgeon catch to remain consistent with that previous biological opinion. So again, looking for, we've done the first part of that, just reviewed the alternative packages and looking for the council. Again, we took all the different closure ideas, times, areas from the previous council meetings, wrapped them up into 4 discrete packages, and looking for the council to endorse those packages for some further analysis, bringing to the AP and committee for final action in April. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jason, for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Jason? Michelle Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jason, for the presentation. So good to hear that the upcoming sturgeon stock assessment will be taken into consideration during this process. I guess the other thing I was wondering is, I know there's additional gear testing that's going on with low profile gillnets that kind of build upon the previous work. Is there an avenue to incorporate the results of that research into this effort?
I'm not sure what's going on right now, but I think the councils have to use the information at hand for, for a decision in April. Looking forward, looking ahead, and so the service will, in the new BIOP, will have to determine is there a jeopardy or not, and so there could be a follow-up action required through that biological opinion. It would, I think probably a lot of it's going to determine, I'd imagine, on trends in sturgeon in that assessment. But if trends in sturgeon, not sturgeon bycatch, but trends in sturgeon are positive, it's probably, it's going to be a very different consideration in that biological opinion assessment than if the trends are negative. I don't know what that assessment is going to find. I think any research that's going on now could potentially be picked up in a follow-up action, but I don't think there's anything like late breaking and that's going to be available for current decision making. But yeah, I mean, if future studies are finished and prove fruitful, then they could be picked up in future actions.
Yeah, just to follow up, I mean, I've spoken, with some fishermen, especially one in particular who's a member of the AP who, has engaged in a lot of this cooperative research. And so, he's working with collaborators, I think a couple in Southern New England and, 5 more off of New Jersey to sort of build upon the existing low profile gear, the smaller twine size that, would require an exemption from the harbor porpoise plan. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that and, make sure that if there's a better mousetrap that we can use it. So.
Yeah, and Kevin Warwick has done a lot of this research. I've talked to him, and he kind of has flagged that his sense is that twine size really is important for the performance of gear. Essentially, the bigger sturgeon just bust out through with the smaller twine size, and that's a big. He thought that was a big part of the gains that they got. Now that the gear has to be replaced more, it's more delicate gear, so that's an issue for fishermen too. But I think from my discussions with him, that's a big part of the better performance in terms of sturgeon in that gear was the big sturgeon could bust out through that smaller twine size.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry, I had just one more question. I know on the timeline, to be determined for submission of the framework and then publication of the proposed rule. I don't know, for Mr. Penny, if you have a sense of where the service is in terms of how quickly you might anticipate a rule being published.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, as Jason said, the requirement is to have measures implemented during this calendar year. So our objective will be to have a final rule published by the end of the calendar year.
Okay, thanks, Mike. No more apologies. This is why we're here, to have these discussions. So feel free to ask the things that are on your mind. Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good job, Jason, on covering that today. You and I had a little discussion the other morning. I've been getting quite a few calls from my constituents in the fishery, especially the spiny dogfish fishery, from their observations, what they're seeing in those areas. And I asked you to take a look at the observer data. Did you get a chance to look at that data in regards to gill net sizes versus take?
I was able to take a quick look at things, and some of the FMAT members are able to process some of the data. It looks like in Maryland, in Virginia, and North Carolina, trips that are landing, that are observed in that area, that there might be some differences in take rates by mesh size. But it's really contingent on the observer coverage, right? Like, my quick look at it, it looks like, you know, maybe the 5-inch gear might have a lower take rate, but it's so contingent on the observer coverage rate. You know, is it just the difference in observer coverage rates leading to differences in amounts of takes by 5-inch? Because, like, you know, there's definitely, you see 5, 5.5, and 6-inch, and some 5 3/4 used in those areas. So I can't say anything definitive. It might be worth digging into a bit as we proceed. Again, our time is short, but there might be something there that's worth digging in, but I can't say for sure right now.
Chairman. Thank you. The information I'm receiving from the industry is that when they're running a 5, 5.25-inch mesh, they're not seeing hardly any sturgeon takes. It might occur once during the actual season, but they're just not seeing it. Anything above that, they definitely are seeing takes. So that is definitely a consideration. You know, we just spent December council meeting trying to work out a couple extra 100,000 pounds for the spiny dogfish fishery. And the alternatives presented to us today, most of them would actually shut down the Virginia portion of that fishery, which means the fishery goes away because they need both ends to make that fishery complete. With that, Mr. Chairman, when appropriate, I have a motion I'd like to offer.
I'll come back to you, Joe. I had a couple other hands around the table. Chris, I'll come back to you. I had Eric Reed first, and then Chris, I'll come over to you. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Didden, could you possibly pull up figure 18 from the framework document, if possible?
Stephen, can you pull that up?
That's the one. So if somebody's going to have to help me reconcile, I mean, you look at this and the bycatch trend seems to be down. But I can't reconcile in my own personal space what this means and what we're talking about today. Can somebody help me with that?
So Garfo has re-estimated sturgeon takes a few times. And the way the sturgeon model works, it like searches for like a best fit. And then it also integrated CAM's data in its most recent run. So this is the most recent trend. And the shaded time block there, that's what the ITS number came from. Well, the ITS numbers were different when they calculated. Like the whole time series has changed. And now the most, you know, you can see after those 5, the shaded ITS years, right? It did bump up a bit. The last data point there is a new one. It wasn't in the last analyses when we were last calculating like how far above or below were we in terms of the ITS. So it's like the whole time series has changed. We did bump up initially above the new time series estimate from that ITS shaded year. But I think, so I think getting like too caught up in like, okay, how much percent are we over, are we under? That's, from my perspective, is not as useful right now because the whole time series has changed. We're still under this BIOP of reduce to some degree, right? That's what the biological opinion said. Councils have to do something to reduce sturgeon to some degree. The time series is what it is. The BIOP is what it is. The new BIOP, we'll take a look at this, what the councils do with the results of the sturgeon assessment. And, maybe they say the most recent, 5-year average is okay, or 10-year, or who knows what. But that is the time series. The BIOP says we have to do something. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you. Chris Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Jason. I guess question comes up a lot whenever we have a set of alternatives and we get to the point of making taking final action. Is where is the range in those alternatives that we could take final action on? And you mentioned that that alternative one, being no action, which in the past means status quo, but that really doesn't mean status quo in this case, because then measures would be put in place through ESA instead of through our FMP process. So I guess for just the set of alternatives that are in the framework now, basically it's bracketed between options 2 and options 5 if we didn't take a specific option, but we kind of mix and match somewhere in between. Am I interpreting that correctly?
What exactly is your question?
Trying to figure out where the boundaries are in these options. So if option one in other frameworks actions is do nothing. Yeah, so we could like do something, and that was the case, we could do something less than some of these closed areas off Delmarva, for instance, right? It's still bracketed if we stay within the range. But if option 1 really isn't do nothing, because if we do nothing, then OPR does something, then kind of our range that we're working under is alternatives 2 and 5. Alternative 1 is really, it's there because it has to be, but in reality, it's not status quo. We do nothing, then the service does something for us, right?
Yeah, I think the range would be greater than 0 up to option 2, which would be the most intense. I don't think 2, 3, 4, 5 are, I don't think that necessarily comprises the range. You could have something less than them, but not 0. That's my read of like what the bounds are.
Okay, any other members of the council? Any questions? Yes, Dan.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, the low profile gear, it worked well in New Jersey, reducing sturgeon bycatch and not reducing monk bycatch. And it also goes on to say that in New York, it reduced the monkfish, directed monkfish landings to the point where they didn't want to try it. But did it reduce sturgeon bycatch in New York? Any more information on that?
I think it did. I think this question came up at New England. I have to review it. I don't know exactly what the effect was. I think it did reduce sturgeon, but it also reduced the directed target a lot.
is there any thoughts from fishermen or on your end why it would reduce monkfish, the targeted species in one state, not the other? Any thoughts from that?
I did chat with Kevin about this a little bit. It wasn't clear to me, like if there were even just a lot of monkfish in the area when it was being tested. And so I just, I think, they wanted to test the gear. They had a window to do it. I don't know that with some additional modifications, some additional tweaking, that it, might be adaptable in some fashion. But as we have now, the information we have now, it didn't seem practicable for the area north of Jersey, off New York, where it was tested.
Okay, any other questions, members of the council? Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification question, Jason. When you talk about the reduction of the twine diameter from 0.90 to 0.81 millimeter, does that fall under alternative 3 or alternative 5, or where would that be? I mean, I see it in the sidebar, but I don't see under what alternative that's being considered.
Yeah, that would be for any of the alternatives that are using the low profile gear. It covers multiple alternatives, but any of the alternatives that have the low profile gear for monkfish, it would also, that twine size is part of that low profile gear package. So across multiple alternatives.
Okay, I'm going to go quickly to the public before we take up the motion that Joe Grist had mentioned. I'm going to take questions at this time for Jason, if there are any members of the public with questions. I have 2 hands. Start with Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And great presentation, Jason. I just have a couple quick questions. When you're looking at the blocks, when you have all these blocks on the chart that shows the hot spots, and are you, for confidentiality purposes, are you limiting that to a 12? It looks like it's 20 miles, those boxes from I guess the Manasquan Inlet out 20 miles. So is that just for confidentiality, or is that what we're trying to? Because I see the closure is that same exact box. So I'm just a little unclear about that.
Sure, Stephen, can you bring the presentation back up?
And while he's bringing it up, okay, there we go. Yeah, so the purple box there that we're looking at, which is basically, I would assume that the other chart you had showed, that purple box there, is that going to be the closure? Is that 20 mile off the inlet box? Is that is that the overlap? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, the data is displayed with the take data is displayed in the squares. And then the rectangular purple box is the proposed area for, whatever months are closed in the different alternatives.
Okay, well, it just alarms me as a fisherman, because I think a lot of that, most fishermen know where the hot spots are, and they're not going to be out 20 miles. So we're basically blocking a 20-mile area up when it could be reduced to, probably a 5 mile, just to be conservative. I mean, I think if we, like what we talked about earlier, if we can just, if the state were to close down the anchored fishery, which you said if it's longer than a 16 or less than a 16-hour soak, there's little or no mortality on the sturgeon. So if the state were to close the 3 mile area for anchored gear, or less than a 16-hour soak, that's going to alleviate a lot of the problems. So if we're in a big rush to push this through by the June deadline, and we have a stock assessment coming out in August, hopefully a new stock assessment, if we were to go with one of these measures, how fast is it to reverse one of these measures? You know what I mean? Because it seems like it's taken us forever to do this. And if we were to go into any of the 20 different, you know how we have alternative 2 to 5, and we can make a combination of any of those alternatives, and we have to get this done by June. I mean, do you think that's even a possibility? I mean, I sit on the monkfish AP and the dogfish AP, and it just seems like, it's a lot to get thrown at us so quickly when we have a new stock assessment coming out in August. Thank you.
So again, the councils are scheduled to take final action at the April council meetings. And I think they will take the input from the AP and committee in March in terms of what suite of alternatives the councils recommend to the service. And in terms of changes, yeah, I mean, a typical framework action from the council takes, and especially if it's a joint action, is somewhere in the half-year to 2-year range from start to finish, as far as frameworks go. If the councils were to recommend changes. Now, again, the councils could end up selecting, the gear package. So you could have a scenario where the federal waters and state waters are mirrored with, with alternative 5 or some, version of something that looks like alternative 5 that is a gear only package. And the FMAP PDT has not completed the analyses to be able to recommend one or the other to the councils as being effective and or practicable. That's what we'll be, that's what we're doing this month, and we'll bring to the AP in committee in March.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jason. Appreciate that.
And for the record, that was Chris. I'm gonna Rayon. Close enough.
Renown, Chris Renown.
There you go. Okay,
Bishop
just
Vessel
wanted
and
to
East
clear
Marie.
that for the record.
Sorry, should introduce myself.
Okay, I've got 2 more hands, and then we'll come back to the council. I'm going to go next to Bonnie Brady, and then Ben Mumford. You're on deck. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you all hear me? Sure. This is Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. I have a couple of questions, Jason, regarding the document. It says on page 21 of the draft, it refers to Southern New England monkfish fishery. And it specifically refers to the 6 observed sturgeon in April, 31 in May, and 33 in December. Does it speak to where? I mean, that Southern New England block is pretty large. Is there any actual ports that are landed or anything along those lines?
And the areas were constructed based on the point locations of the takes and the observer data, which are discrete lat-long points. The areas were constructed either looking at the points or the 10-minute squares that they occurred in, but we can't display the. So there were takes that were extending, fairly, far out. It's not like all the takes were right up against the shoreline and the FMAP PDT drew these, boxes that were super precautionary. There were takes extending fairly far out. That's why the areas themselves do extend far, as far as they do. But in terms of, but we can't display those individual takes. Garfo has said that those constitute confidential information. So I can show those, and we may be able to describe what ports some of the trips were originating. If there were some ports that seem to have, associated with more takes or others, but it's just going to depend on how the data break down in terms of potential confidential information.
Right. Yeah, I'm curious as to specifically that kind of information because like I said, there's several ports in Rhode Island, several ports in Massachusetts, and I seem to recall from a Sturgeon document that was out maybe 2 years ago that overall the area south of Long Island and the fishermen in federal waters there were not as much of the issue, and that only when it was combined with further to our north and east did that become an issue. So I'm wondering if some of these blocks can somehow become smaller. And the reason also why 20 to 21 were not included, was that purely because of COVID or?
Yeah, just 2020 because of COVID's disruption to observer placement. I think the determination was that any data we're getting out of from 2020 are not likely to be representative of where sturgeon takes are occurring overall.
Okay, and last question, I had asked you before, and you may not know, and maybe I could ask Mr. Pentney, as far as in the 2017 assessment that is, I guess, the driving this bus at the moment, did we ever find out whether any state data was included within that assessment? And if so, what state data is in that assessment as far as in tagging for various states? Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, what's driving this action for clarification is 2021 biological opinion that had a term and condition that required action by 2024 to reduce bycatch. So that's what's driving this. The exceedance of the ITS last year is a different issue. That is what's driving our new biological opinion that we will be conducting this calendar year. So I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, Mike, I may have jumbled things. I mean, I think I had spoken to you, I know about the assessment in 2017 because the 2012 assessment didn't have any state data when they made their original determinant that was endangered. And so I guess I'm wondering the 2017 assessment that was done and whether or not even the 2021 buy-up, I'm assuming, is based on the assessment from 2017. No? Am I incorrect in that? Or just the numbers of catch? Doesn't one feed off the other?
Yeah, I think this might require us to talk offline or to try to nail down some things that we don't have ready to go today in this presentation. So
Okay.
I think we talk about assessments, there's a couple of different things. The commission, and Tony can speak to this, the commission has done assessments of sturgeon, stock assessments of sturgeon. The agency has done 5-year reviews of the endangered species status of sturgeon. And so I think that's what if you're referring to a 2017 assessment, that's a question for Tony and the commission process. You're talking about the 5-year review. That's the information that I shared with you a few months ago about what data that 5-year review reflected.
Correct. That's what I'm specifically referring to. And whether that information was put into the assessment process or do they even put that information in?
Tony Kearns. And welcome, by the way, Tony.
Thank you, Mike. So the 2017 stock assessment does include state data. Bonnie, the stock assessment is on our webpage if you want to look at all of the data that are included in the assessment. If you have any questions, you can reach out to our staff and we'd be happy to answer any of those.
Who would be the lead on that, please, Tony? Thank you.
James Boyle is the lead.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, next I'm going to go to Ben Mumford. Ben, if you have multiple questions, if you can prioritize those questions, and I'll just pick the top priority question. And then Kevin, I'll go to you with the same request, and then we're going to move on to take up the action at the council. Go ahead, Ben.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. So, my question is, will or what will the National Marine Fisheries Service response be if the council votes to use option number one, the no change? Like if the council wanted to wait till the next stock assessment for Atlantic sturgeon, and then I guess what would happen if the stock assessment shows that Atlantic sturgeon numbers are increasing?
Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There's actually quite a lot to unpack there. So the first thing I think that you mentioned is if the councils in April adopt alternative one, no action, what would the response be?
From the National Marine Fisheries Service, the trigger function you guys talked about.
Right. So no action by the councils in April would be inconsistent with the term and condition of the 2021 biological opinion. That 2021 biological opinion authorizes the monkfish and gillnet fisheries to operate knowing that they may encounter and interact with sturgeon. So so step one might be that those fisheries lose coverage under the Endangered Species Act, and any take of a sturgeon in those fisheries would be illegal. In order to prevent that, the agency would implement actions to reduce bycatch of sturgeon in the fisheries this calendar year in order to ensure that we continue to comply with the 2021 biological opinion. What those measures are, I can't say because I don't know. We would have to analyze likely the information that the councils will be analyzing and looking at over the next couple of months in order to get something in place as quickly as possible. But it would be something that we would be doing outside of the council process. The next step is the biological opinion that we would be undertaking this year. What we are intending to do is use whatever action the councils take in April. We'll change the baseline against which we determine whether and to what extent the monkfish and dogfish gillnet fisheries are having an impact on sturgeon, which may or may not be leading to jeopardy. So if the councils fail to take any action in April, then the baseline would be the status quo. So we would then be analyzing the likelihood of the status quo fishery leading to jeopardy of sturgeon under the Endangered Species Act. The council's taken action in April. Even if we haven't implemented it yet, that will still form the baseline for our review of the fisheries under the Endangered Species Act for the 2024 biological opinion.
That makes sense. So my second question is, if this, after the action is made, if the stock assessment data shows a good amount, what will happen? And if there is a negative effect to both monk and spiny dogfish fisheries, will it be reversed in a rapid fashion? This is more or less the same question that Chris asked earlier.
So when we think about stock assessment and Endangered Species Act listed species, there's two things we need to consider. The first is whether the status changes because of new information about the health of the resource or the species. So, the results of the upcoming stock assessment will be used in the next 5-year review, and that will review whether or not sturgeon remain as endangered or threatened or theoretically even removed, although that's pretty unlikely. But the stock assessment will also inform the new incidental take statement that we use to authorize takes by the fisheries that are covered by the biological opinion. So again, theoretically speaking or hypothetically speaking, if there are more sturgeon in the water than there were when we did the 2021 biological opinion, all else being equal, we would expect takes to increase with no sort of marginal additional risk to the resource, because there's more sturgeons, you'd expect more encounters. So hypothetically, one outcome of a stock assessment that suggests that there are sturgeon have there's more sturgeon than there were 5 years ago, is that the incidental take statement numbers will be higher. So it authorize more takes by the dogfish and monkfish fisheries while keeping those fisheries under the protection of the Endangered Species Act.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that answer. Last comment from the public or question, I'm going to go to Kevin Wark. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Council. I heard some questions about the low profile gillnet. It was something that I had designed like 10 years ago in conjunction with the Science Center. It was the fourth of 4 treatments that we had designed. And if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to answer any questions. We've also distributed all that BREP proposal gear to the eight collaborators up and down the coast. 7 of them plan on fishing it this spring. We had the one New York boat that fished it this fall. He got his hands on the gear quickly enough to get it out. So, but I'd be happy to offer anything that I know to the council about this modified gear.
Jason.
Kevin, did the discussion over the last kind of half hour generally reflect in accurate, did it match your understanding of things, or was there anything in particular you wanted to clarify?
It did, and I think someone asked about the New York, the New York testing. So that was a collaborator that had worked with me like 10 years ago, and I made all the gear myself and distributed it. These gears were made, you know, at a net shop, the recent ones. And when I made that gear, skate really wasn't, you know, there was a lot of monkfish around. You really weren't, you know, the skates will hamper your monkfish fishing. So, but we weren't focused on skates at that time, you know, when I first started that. So I knew it would reduce skate catch. Just that 1-inch bigger mesh lets a lot of skates go through. The whole idea, I was a sturgeon fisherman in the 80s, you know, so I knew that, you know, these bigger fish are going to be very strong. And the idea was to let the small ones slide through and the big ones break it. Reduce the vertical height, tie down throughout to bring down the vertical height to reduce the risk. But so things are changing. And now this has become sometimes a pseudo skate fishery. You know, climate's changing. Our run for the last 2 years has actually started 2 months late, 2 winters in a row. I mean, unprecedented after 30 years of the same show up time. I mean, we caught stingrays on the west side of the mud hole in January a couple of years ago. I mean, it's unimaginable, some of the things that are going on. But I think this spring we will get a good idea. I'm sure the New York vessel told me that he saw a 50% reduction in skate catch. He caught nearly no monk because there was no monk there. He didn't like the gear. He said it wasn't nearly as good as the ones that I made, you know, back 10 years ago, but I haven't fished it. I don't know what it looks like. I have very trusted collaborators that are going to use this spring, guys that have been in the business for 40 years, plus some of them like myself. So we'll be able to get a good read on the gear. But I just wanted to offer any explanations, Mr. Chairman or Jason, to anyone that had a question. And I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to offer my insight.
Okay, we appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you. Okay, we're going to bring this back to the council. I'm going to recognize Joe Grist, who mentioned that he may or may not have a motion, but Joe, it's all you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I most definitely have a motion. I move to include a subalternative to alternative 5 gear-only sturgeon package to be reviewed by the FMAT, AP, and Monkfish Spiny Dogfish Committee to exempt vessels using less than 5¼ inch gill net mesh from the overnight soak prohibition.
Okay, we have a motion made on behalf of Joe Grist. Do I have a second? I'll go with Sonny Quinn. You got his hand up first, Skip. Okay, Joe, would you like to provide some rationale for your motion?
Sure. Independent of the information Jason provided today from the Observer Program, I was receiving similar information. Some would say anecdotally, but the commercial fishermen, the southern fishery, were all telling me pretty much the same thing. That when they're using 5 to 5 1/4 inch mesh, they're not seeing interactions primarily with sturgeon. And they're using greater than 5 1/4, they are seeing the interactions. And most of them are moving to the smaller mesh. The few that were not there yet said they were just, at this point, they were using up old gear, but they noted honestly to me that they know they need to go down. If they are limited to, say, the daytime only soak, they're not going to be able to produce enough catch to make the trip viable. If they're excluded by the areas, we know they're making a quarter, they're making a quarter on a pound. So the further the distance, the greater the cost of the fishery. It's not going to be viable for them to go out and catch this. And, in turn, what we do is, as was noted in December, we take out the southern fishery, we take out the entire fishery. So I would like to have this alternative considered by the three groups so that when we come back in April and have to take this on a final action, we have that information and have something in hand to consider to not wipe out the southern fishery.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Sonny, do you have any additional rationale you'd like to provide?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to count on that, as the last time I stated how important these fisheries are, both the monk fishery and the dog fishery, that at least we can see and try to fix the problem instead of putting the fishermen out of business. This is an important fishery that these guys can catch these fish, and it enables them to stay in business to pursue other fisheries. So I'm hoping we could, motion will pass and we can see how it works out. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have a motion. I'm not going to read it into the record, but it is now property of the council, and I'll look for discussion on the motion. Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So just to keep everybody sort of thinking along the lines of the timeline. So the New England Council had this meeting a couple of weeks ago, had a range of alternatives that was approved for further analysis and with the expectation of taking final action in April. What I'm unclear on in this case, because this is a joint action for two joint FMPs, whether a change to the alternatives as suggested by this motion would require the action to go back to the New England Council to approve the addition of this alternative before, and then delay action accordingly so that final action could not be taken in April by New England Council, and it would push this to June. I really hope we avoid pushing this action to June, because that really messes with our timeline for the biological opinion and for getting this action implemented in 2024. I don't know if that's a question that I can ask the chair of New England Council to weigh in on, but that's my concern with this motion, is that it would trigger a requirement to go back to New England Council before we could move forward with the framework as is.
I could go to Jason or Eric. You guys can rock, paper, scissors. Eric.
Go first, and he can correct me when I'm wrong. So, honestly, this is an addition of a sub alternative. If it was something that was going to be removed, I would be more uptight about a removal of an option. This is an addition of a sub alternative in an existing alternative. And given that the monkfish and spiny dogfish committees are referenced in this motion, those are joint committees between us, and we lead one and you lead the other. I think it's probably, I mean, if this should pass, I think it's probably enough that the committee will be engaged to act. There's going to be analysis, it's future analysis. That's what we're going to do. So it will be analyzed, and then the committees will have a bite at that particular apple. So I don't think it has to go back to New England to be approved. If it was a removal, I would say absolutely has to go back. But I'm thinking that it's not a giant substantive change. It's just another sub-alternative. And I think it's okay that if this is included, that would be fine without going back to New England.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Jason, do you want to add?
Yeah, and my thinking would be that, alternative 5, they're not, as it stands right now, they're not exempted. So you're trimming back a little bit from there, so you're still within the range because you have no action. Alternative 5 is here, and you're trimming back a little bit from 5, so you're still in the range. That'd be my perspective.
Sounds like a good perspective in continuing to move forward with this. Are there any other comments or discussion on this motion? Anyone from the council? Is there any member of the public that would like to offer comment? I see none in the room, but I'll go to Bonnie online. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, Mike. Hold on. I've got Tim Froelich on the line. Tim, can you hear me? Yeah, you're talking to the Mid-Atlantic Council right now regarding, they've got a sub-alternative of alternative 5, gear-only sturgeon package to exempt vessels using less than 5.25-inch gill net mesh from the overnight soak prohibition. Do you have any comments on that or anything else that we can maybe squeeze in very quickly from before because you couldn't get on?
I don't know. Personally, I don't know. And
Timmy Froelich is from Shinnecock, by the way, gentlemen.
the whole situation is concerning, I guess. And it's disheartening after 30 years of letting the fishery recover, that this fishery that we let recover is going to put us out of business. And I was a gill net fisherman from New York to use those nets. And I used them the way I used my own. I used Kevin's nets to when Kevin hung them himself. And those nets caught fish. These ones this fall, there was no, I think it's from the windmills and all the activity that they're doing in the fall that drives the fish off the historic range where they are. But the nets that I got this year were hung different than the ones that Kevin hung. And I'm not opposed to trying it again in the spring. That was going to be my purpose. I was going to do it anyway, but this fall I didn't catch any monks at all to speak of anything. I caught a lot of skates, but I didn't catch many monks. I don't know what you're asking me because I just got on this phone call 5 minutes ago and I'm lost.
That's okay, Tim. Speaking to what Kevin Wark talked about regarding the nets is probably a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for your comments, and sorry for the confusion. Let's go back to Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question. Is it a no overnight soak, or is it less than a 16-hour soak? Is that what we're talking about? Because I see this as using less, so no, from overnight soaks. I thought it was, we were trying to get rid of anchored gear for 24-hour soaks. I didn't think it was an overnight soak. So I just want a little clarification on that, because this, if this is saying overnight soaks and we're talking about 16-hour soaks, then I'm just a little confused on that. So if somebody can give me a little clarification on that before you guys make this a motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'll go to the maker. What your intent was there, Joe?
No overnight soaks. I did not specify whether this would be limited by 16 hours or greater. I kept it kind of open. I'd like to get the input from FMAT and the AP on that.
Jason?
So the alternative as it stands is an overnight soak time prohibition from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. That's how in the document these alternatives are constructed. There was some initial discussion of like a 24-hour or a certain time soak limit, but the input we got from Coast Guard is that it'd be impossible to enforce. So that we eventually ended up with the alternative as it stands in the document is that the gear would have to be out of the water between 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. in whatever times they are. I think in the New Jersey one, it's in just looking at alternative 5, the gear only one, it's May and November. And then in Delmarva, it's November through March. So my understanding of Joe's alternative here is that he's looking for some consideration where those measures, as they are in the document, would stand for mesh greater than or equal to or greater than 5 1/4 inch. But if you were using less than 5 1/4 inch, so I think the intent here was a 5-inch mesh, that then they would be exempted from that prohibition of having gear in the water from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. in those particular months that are associated with that alternative.
Okay, I'm getting acknowledgement from Joe that what Jason just summarized was along the lines of what he was thinking.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, I just wanted the clarification because, we talked 16 hours or less, there's little or no mortality, so if guys want to fish at night, as long as they're tending their gear at night, I was just making sure.
I'm also on the Spiny Dogfish Committee. I would be fully supportive of listening to further measures, including this one here. As Councilman Grist pointed out, this is a significant fishery that any type of reduction in effort would probably collapse the fishery as complete, including the members that I work with in New Hampshire. So I would be supportive of hearing, this alternative fully developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay, any other members of the public? Any other council members? The council ready for the question? All right, I'm going to read the motion into the record and then I'll call the question of the council. I move to include a substitute alternative to alternative 5, gear-only sturgeon package to be reviewed by the FMAT, AP, and Monkfish/Spiny Dogfish Committee to exempt vessels using less than 5 1/4 inch gill net mesh from the overnight soak prohibition. Go ahead and state your point.
So I'm thinking back to Robert's rules. The words that you say on the record are the motion. Pretty sure you just said that this would be a substitute alternative, not a sub-alternative.
Okay, I'll go read it again. Thanks for picking that up. I'll put my glasses on this time, even though the text is large enough. I'll read a little more slowly. I move to include a sub-alternative to alternative 5, gear-only sturgeon package to be reviewed by the FMAT, AP, and Monkfish/Spiny Dogfish Committee to exempt vessels using less than 5 1/4 inch gill net mesh from the overnight soak prohibition. All those in the room in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. If you're online, please raise your hand online. Okay, I count 17. Is anyone opposed to this motion? Maureen, I saw you. Maureen, can you clarify if you were in support or in opposition of the motion? Maureen Davidson. Okay, maybe Maureen, if you're speaking, you're on mute. Just want to clarify your vote on the record. It went up and down very quickly. Okay, so that is, I did not count Maureen initially, so that's 18 in favor. I did get Scott Lennox. Okay, and no, 0 opposed. Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries by unanimous consent. Okay. Yes, Mr. Grist.
When ready, I'm ready to offer a main motion.
Okay.
I move to endorse the packages of alternatives for additional analysis and input from the advisory panels prior to the joint committee making recommendations for April 2024 final action.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Let's get it on the board so everyone can read it. Second by Skip Feller. Any discussion on the motion? Joe, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just moving it forward.
Okay, discussion. Dan Farnham.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I have my hand up. My concern was before we talk about the main motion, I wanted to talk about an alternative, maybe a possibility of a sub-alternative for alternative 5 to allow New York to use low-profile gillnet gear in the monkfish fishery. In my mind, the only reason we're not considering it is that because of the low monkfish, directed monkfish catch that occurred in the experimental fishery. But after listening to Jason, there was a sturgeon, a decrease in sturgeon bycatch when he did the experiment.
Yeah, I have to double check on exactly what the results of the New York work was. That's my recollection, but I don't recall exactly. And I think as Tim and Kevin mentioned, I think there may have also been like a reduction in skate catch also. So sounds like there are a number of kind of complicating factors in that New York work.
So Dan, let me ask you, in order to deal with that, we have to figure out what to do with the motion on the floor right now. So would you be, you're planning, and I should, I was deciding who to call on, but you're ready with a motion if we decide to hold off on this for now?
I would like to do that, yes.
Okay, let's see if we can address that. Adam Nowalski.
I move to table the existing motion to allow until there's discussion of a sub-option for low-profile exemption from New York.
Can that be a motion to postpone instead of table?
If you'd prefer it that way.
Yeah, it's a little easier.
So I'll simply move to postpone this motion, period.
Until after a discussion on an additional sub-alternative. Okay, would anyone like to second that? Peter Hughes. Any discussion on the motion to postpone? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion to postpone? Seeing none, the motion is postponed until we have a discussion regarding an additional potential sub-alternative, which I'm going to turn to Dan Farnham for to provide us that motion if you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to have a sub-alternative in alternative 5 to allow for low-profile gillnet gear in the monk fishery in New York waters. or in southern New England, I'm sorry.
Okay, keep an eye on the board, and I think Jason's typing this. I can't tell who's typing it, but Jason's typing it. Just make sure it reads as you'd like, and then I'll look for a second.
Number 5.
Okay, we have a motion made by Dan Farnham. Do I have a second on that? Any second? Sunny Gwynn. Dan, you want to provide some rationale?
My rationale would be that the existing trial of the gear that was done in New York waters did show a reduction in sturgeon bycatch at that time.
Sunny, do you have anything you'd like to add for justification rationale?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it just seemed what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, I don't see why they could do it up one place and not do it the other. So just to make everything consistent.
I must be hanging out with you too much, because I had that in my head before you even said it, which was kind of scary. Mike Penny.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of conceptually, I guess I have concerns about this, adding this alternative at this point because of the need for analysis that would be required in order to understand the implications of this. So there's a number of things that could be driving the result that Jason described, which is that, you know, the recommendation is to not include it for New York because of the results. I think it's Fox et al. Study. Could have been very low sample size, New York versus New Jersey. So we have more confidence in the results from New Jersey because there was only, you know, small number of samples in New York. Could have been the New Jersey participants were really familiar with the gear, so they knew how to set it right. They knew how to use it. They got the results that they knew they could get. New York, maybe the fishermen. I don't know anything about who participated, but as you know, I mean, sometimes we introduce a new gear type. It takes a while to learn how to set it right and hang it right to get the results that you want. But I think one thing we also look at when we look at comparing, you know, reduction in sturgeon catch, we may have seen a reduction in sturgeon catch, but if we saw a reduction in monkfish that outweighed that reduction. So for a given amount, if we think about it in terms of for a given amount of monkfish catch, what would we see in terms of sturgeon? We could actually see an expected increase in sturgeon because you'd be setting for longer, more sets. So I just think there's a lot to dig into. Because if we reduce sturgeon take by 50%, but we reduce monkfish catch by 80%, on balance, that's not going to work. I don't know where in all of those factors these results fall in, but it is something that I think the FMAT would have to look at before we could know whether this is a valid alternative.
Okay, Sunny Gwynn, and then Adam, I'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, with all due respect, I know we still have Kevin Work on here, and I would like to really hear from the fisherman on the comments that you just made, since he was part of that experiment and had a little bit of knowledge of it, that maybe he could comment on it to just for our ease of mind to see what he has to say, if he would. I don't know if he's still on here and would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can go out to the public in a second. I had another comment, but if Kevin or other fishermen who participated in that are willing to offer some thoughts, well, I'll certainly take that after I go to Adam Nowalski. Adam?
So I'm sure Kevin will be happy to speak for himself, but the thumbs up on my phone from him is probably a good indicator of where he'll be on that. But with regards to Mr. Petney's concern here, the last motion specifically tasked the AP and the spiny dogfish, monkfish committee with looking at that alternative. Is that implicit in this motion? And if it isn't, I would move to amend that. And would that input from those bodies help address Mr. Petney's concern about the information we need to have with the impacts of this alternative? So that's my question. Is that implicit here? And if not, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to amend to make sure it is implicit that not only does this alternative have FMAT discussion, but also the AP and the spiny dogfish, monkfish committee.
So I think for the record, it would be more clear if that's what you'd like the FMAT and the AP and the committees to take a look at, to have it in the motion. So I'll entertain your motion to amend, Adam. And if we get a second on that, seconded by Dan Farnham. So the motion to amend to include previous language, whatever that other language was.
Would you like me to put that on the record?
Sure.
I move to amend to add a sentence. This subalternative will be reviewed by the FMAT, AP, and Joint Spiny Dogfish Monkfish Committee.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend. Mike Penny's hand was up, and then Jason, I have a question for you. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, just to, I don't know, fine tooth the motion, or get into the weeds. The motion reads, to allow the use of the gear in the Southern New England, Southern New England area. Gear's allowed now. So the the way alternative 5 reads for the New Jersey hotspot is require to use it. So a little nuance, but I just want to make sure that, if you're suggesting that we require the use of that gear in that area, that we're clear in terms of what's expected, because the gear is allowed now.
That was my intent. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll get through this first, and then we'll clear that up. Make sure that it reads appropriately. Okay, any other discussion? I guess, Jason, my question for you is, as these tasks continue to be added onto your workload, does adding another sub-alternative and the analysis that coincides with that, or adding 2 sub-alternatives if this were to pass, how does that look as far as workload in order to stay on our timeline for an April final action?
Yeah, and I can't exactly answer that because it's a joint, and so this involves New England staff also doing work. So that's really hard to answer. The other one seems pretty easy to incorporate since it's just a trim. This is kind of something that hasn't, I think you could still argue that there are measures in the document that would close that area, that Southern New England area. So this is, I think you could kind of make an argument still kind of in that bound. seems like you could probably add it, but it will add some. I don't think it's. I mean, there are measures in there for this gear type in general. There are measures in there that speak to the southern New England area for closures. I mean, I think we can describe the amount of, effort that was in that area and, what the studies say. The studies are the studies in terms of the likely impacts of the gear type. I think it can probably be integrated and maintain the April timeline. Sorry, I had to think that through a little bit, but.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was having exactly that conversation before you called on Jason. Your meeting is starts on the 9th of April, and ours is the following week. I mean, if that's the task, that's fine, but how thoroughly that task is addressed is somewhat subjective, I suppose, at this point. And some of the Robin Freedy's on the call. I don't know if she wants to address it or not, but I'm a little uptight about 2 more alternatives, and you've only got 2 months to do it, and there are other things that staff has to do. So,
Jason?
And the timeline is really, we have the rest of February to do it, because then it has to go, pretty much everything has to be wrapped up by the end of February to go to the AP and committee. So it's really this month. Again, Robin may have some additional input. It seems like it's a sub-alternative. I think we could give it a go, and then the committee can either decide it's, been addressed sufficiently or not.
Who did you say, Eric, from staff would wanted to speak?
it's Robin Freedy.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if she wants to speak, Mike, but
No, I was just, having a side conversation with Chris. I mean, everyone's going to do the best they can to get it done. And, I can certainly turn to Robin if Robin wants to offer some thoughts on that. And I realize the interest in getting this done by April. I certainly do. It's important to get it done. It's just, these are the types of things that when timing becomes such that you can't fully analyze something that could have a tremendous impact, it's sometimes difficult. But I'm not going to, Robin, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're willing to offer some thoughts from your end, it might be helpful here. If not, it's okay. Jason answered for the group.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Sorry, I have my hand up. I don't know if you...
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
I'm
yes,
sorry.
I could hear you. I just didn't know what you said, so.
Sure. I think
ahead.
Jason and Eric covered it a lot. I would, and I hear the sentiment expressed, that this is kind of directed at the FMAT will review it. I think we've recognized the timeline here. Maybe just to set expectations. It's been covered. The information would really just be coming from what we've already discussed on the Fox et al. Study, referencing the sort of the performance of the gear off New York. I'm not sure how exactly that could be. There'd be a lot of assumptions, I think, applying that broadly to this southern New England area, and just how far the FMAT is able to get into that. Yeah, I've been struggling with this one a little bit too, because all along, I think FMAT's only really been considering the gear required in New Jersey, since the results are more clearly demonstrating, but kind of recognizing that there is ongoing interest in studying it for this area, and both committees, the joint committees, weighed in on kind of continuing this as a research priority. But yeah, I guess I don't, on the spot, trying to say, definitively yes or no, but certainly some expectations of kind of the level of analysis that could go into this at this stage. I think is helpful.
Okay, yeah, that's to be expected. All right, so that's the information that we have in following up with this motion. I want to ask, is there any further discussion on the motion? Adam?
I'll just add my willingness to amend is because I am in support of the main motion. What I have heard to support the main motion is that there is evidence that the gear will have a positive impact on sturgeon bycatch. What I've heard is that there have been multiple nets used to test this, some with better efficiency and effectiveness than others. So I think we need to hear from the fishermen. You know, Kevin seemed to have better success. The New York fishermen we've heard from today have indicated they've been happier with that gear than what they most recently tested. So I think we will benefit, and what I will lean heavily on in final decision making as to which sub-alternative, if any, to support would be what the committee comes back with. And I would rely heavily on them to weigh in on these alternatives. One, with regards to whether there's been enough analysis done that we can take action on it. And two, whether or not it is A, beneficial to the sturgeon stock, and B, whether or not it will do so without having a drastically negative impact on the monkfish in particular. So wanted to add that voice of support for the main motion and add a little more rationale for why I was willing to make this amendment and what I seek to get from the input from those listed here.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, I think it's time. We've heard from a number of people. It's time to call the question on this motion to amend. I'm going to read into the record with my glasses on this time. I move to amend to add a sentence. This sub-alternative will be reviewed by FMAT, PDT, AP, and Joint Spiny Dogfish and Monkfish Committee. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion carries by consent. And I'll ask that Jason add that line to the underlying main motion. And then it's back to you, Dan, to clarify what you and Mike were discussing. Make sure we get the motion right.
Do I have to amend the motion, or can we just add, take out allow and to allow and add in be required to use? What's the?
Well, since we've got the Roberts Rules of Order guy sitting next to me here today, bringing up all kinds of things. Let's just we can do it very quickly. If your original intention was different from the motion, let's go ahead and move to amend and then replace X with Y. And if you can put that on the record with how you'd like it read, I'll look for a second. We'll limit discussion and then move on.
Yep, that's fine.
Read it.
I move to amend to change allow to require.
Okay, we have a motion to amend and a second on that. Michelle Duval. We're going to limit discussion on this motion. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, that motion carries. We're now bring that back to the main motion, make that adjustment. Adam?
So just in sake of completeness, alternative 5 currently specifies for New Jersey low-profile gillnet gear that time period would be a year-round requirement. Does this motion also carry that same time requirement, or given that some of the other options have different time constraints in, just for clarity, would this be year-round, or is there some intention here for some other time period?
The intention was to mirror the requirements for New Jersey.
Okay, that's clear on the record then. Okay, we have a motion. I'll ask one last time. Is there any discussion on this motion? Mike Penny?
Just noting that I'm not opposed to the motion. I think that, the previous motion where we added a sub-alternative created an exemption from, that was going to be fairly limited to the southern area, to the mid-Atlantic area. This is adding a new prohibition or requirement that would apply largely to, significantly more New England fishermen. And the New England Council didn't have the benefit to discuss this 2 weeks ago for inclusion in the framework. So I have concern that, adding this new requirement that wasn't considered or discussed by the New England Council, where New England fishermen were participating and listening, is just a step too far at this stage in the process.
Any other discussion before I call the question on this? Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I stuck my neck out on the first one because it was a sub-alternative that seemed reasonable. The word require is what gives me heartburn. Was to allow or whatever it may be, that might be a different thing. And I can't give you a definitive answer. I'd have to talk to Dr. O'Keefe on whether or not we would have to address this. So I mean, if you pass it, see what happens, but I am not sure what the Home Office is going to say about that particular word. I don't know if Dr. Moore or somebody else want to add to that, that's fine. But I have a little bit of heartburn over it. I can't vote on it, Mike, so as you like to remind me all the time. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to check.
Yeah, that's understandable.
In which case, you're not going to know whether or not New England's going to want to revisit this until after this motion is dealt with. And we're talking about an April final action. That's what we want. I mean, we may be in jeopardy there. We may. Don't get me wrong. I support the motion. I understand the intent of it, but having the word require in there is something that is a little bit out of my comfort zone.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly don't want to speak for Kate or the council, but I think the point that you made earlier, Eric, about the committees being involved may take care of some of the concern. So we will have the committees look at these alternatives, the sub-alternative, just like they're going to look at the other sub-alternative and weigh in. Then we're going to bring it back to the councils for consideration. If at that point, the New England Council has issues with this particular alternative or sub-alternative, then they wouldn't vote to approve it.
Yeah, I mean, my original comments still apply here, Chris. I'm just expressing my concern. That's all. And I don't disagree with you, but I don't run the staff, and I have to be clear on what we can and cannot do or want to do. We'd like to move this along, and I don't anticipate any problem with it. I want to make sure that I said my piece, and I did.
Okay, thanks, Eric, and safe travels. Mike Penny, and then I'll come to you, Jason.
Yeah, I appreciate Chris's point about the committee, but the committees are not the full council. And, the committees are designed to provide input, to help shape, develop, recommendations to the full council. The New England Council, the first time the full New England Council will have a chance to discuss this sub-alternative will be after the Mid-Atlantic Council takes final action on the framework adjustment. So if the Mid-Atlantic Council adopts this motion as a preferred alternative, they'll do that before New England Council theoretically is even aware that this alternative exists. And then the New England Council is expected to adopt the identical measures that the Mid-Atlantic Council adopts, or we have to go back to the drawing board and discuss in June. So were those 2 weeks reversed and New England Council meeting first, maybe I'd feel more comfortable that New England Council could consider the alternative, make a decision, and then it would come to Mid-Atlantic and they could, understand the perspective of New England and presumably, hopefully be in concert. But given that, I think this is too much of a risk that New England Council will not be able to act appropriately, has not had the opportunity to consider this motion, this new sub-alternative. So I would ask that the council vote this motion down. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. And if we put ourselves in the reverse and put ourselves in the New England Council's shoes, I'd have to agree that I think we would be challenged by only seeing something for the first time after final action that's been taken on a sub-alternative by the other council. Adam?
So given Mr. Petney's comments about he thinks if this is important enough that it would be better for the New England Council to weigh in first, I would offer two potential ways forward. Number one is I understand the council will not have, New England Council will not have time to get together and formally weigh in, but I would like to think that there's a strong enough working relationship between leadership and executive directors through the committee process that we should be able to get as a council some very clear signal about where those members stand on something, so that we would have that information if we go forward with the schedule as it's laid out, to know where we think New England would stand, and we would then use that information in our decision making in April. If we don't think that's a viable path forward, I do wonder if there's some way for we as the Mid-Atlantic Council to delay our decision making to either take up this issue jointly at the New England Council meeting or schedule something for ourselves to take this up at a short time afterward, virtually, whatever we need to do, given that option's on the table in order to still meet the time frame requirements. So I would offer, and I'd look to leadership for thoughts on those two ways forward to address the regional administrator's concern here, as well as what we've heard from the chair of the New England Council.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Adam, for that suggestion. A couple of things. I was talking to Jason about this particular alternative, and he reminded me that it was on the list of research priorities for both councils. So at some point, this has been considered and put in the parking lot for future research. Now bringing it into a different sort of, we're bringing it into the alternatives to be considered by April, right, for our April meetings. And if in fact we want to do that, we can accommodate it with a special council meeting. Schedule, a virtual meeting and just do it. In fact, that's what the council wants to do. Certainly we could arrange that. But we do need to get back to this other part that Jason reminded me about. I forgot all about it, but again, Jason, maybe you can clarify exactly how this was being handled prior to our conversation today.
Yeah, and I'm just building off of the New England presentation I'd have to go back and dig out the exact motions, but I mean, I think the council's both already recommended adding this explore use of low-profile gillnet gear in the spiny dogfish fishery and southern New England region for monkfish as a potential future management tool. So, and there's no reason why this, again, couldn't come up in the future as another option. So, I don't know, I also, combination of workload concerns and a process thing of hanging things up, I think our staff shares that concern.
Yeah, and I think that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Eric, and then one last comment before we vote.
I mean, you know, to me, the easiest solution is to postpone final action until June. And Mike, you probably don't like that idea, but that's a way out of this situation. So, I mean, I don't know what that does to the end product here. I don't. But to me, that's the safest way to address the concerns.
Mike Benny.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And if we were talking about a normal kind of council fishery management action, I would say, yeah, let's delay until, delay final action until June and make sure we got everything right. Delaying final action on this action, sturgeon action till June, is two things. One, means we will not comply with the term and condition of the 21 BIOP because we will not be able to implement measures in 2024. That's point one. Point two is we're under the gun to complete the 2024 BIOP, and we need to know what the baseline is for that. So staff we have worked it out so that we can wait until April, the week of the New England Council meeting, to know what the baseline is for the 2024 biological opinion. We can't wait any longer. We need to we need to be making progress on that biological opinion.
Jason?
And process-wise, I mean, there'll be another monkfish specifications framework coming along in a year or two, right? And so, I mean, this could be added to a future like monkfish framework. It's either specifications framework or a regular framework. If that research proved that this gear was useful with more people using it, right? I mean, there's nothing to prevent the New England Council from spinning up a framework to consider this one topic if they deemed it fit in their priorities.
Yeah, and the other option I think that I continue to think about is the fact that we can hold a special meeting within days of the New England Council meeting as the mid to after final action is taken by the New England Council, we could have a special virtual meeting to consider the alternatives that were selected to move that forward without that delay that takes us all the way to June. So Chris has confirmed, talking with Chris, he said that we can make that happen if that's the will of the council. One last comment, I had Dan Farnham got this whole thing started, and then I'm going to read it into the record and call the question. We need to move on. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After listening to everybody around the table, the concerns, and especially Jason's last comment about an upcoming framework, I'm comfortable withdrawing the motion as it stands right now. Never mind.
Yeah, I assumed we've already amended it and it's property of the council at this point. So perhaps you would suggest voting it down as another way to not have it included. And won't say any more on that, but that's the other way to get it off the board. Okay, I'm going to read the motion into the record and then call the question. I move to add a subalternative to require use of low-profile gear in the southern New England polygon in alternative number 5. This subalternative will be reviewed by FMAT, PDT, AP, and Joint Spiny Dogfish Monkfish Committee. All those in favor? please raise your hand. I count 4 in the room and see none online. So that's 4 in favor. All those opposed, same sign. It's 11. Dan, did you? 12. Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion fails for lack of a majority. And now we go back to the motion, to the postponed motion. Since we've had the discussion regarding the sub-alternative under consideration that was just voted down, we're going to go back to the main motion, which I believe wrapped this all up in a nice little bow.
Stephen, can you just scroll up a ways and you'll get back to that postponed motion? It starts with I move to endorse. Next one, no, one more.
One more up, Stephen.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to read the motion into the record and then I'll ask for discussion and then we'll vote. I move to endorse the packages of alternatives for additional analysis and input from the advisory panels prior to the joint committee making recommendations for April 2024 final action. Is there any discussion on this motion? Is there any opposition to the motion? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Is there anything else we need to take up here today, Jason, on the Sturgeon framework?
Nope.
Okay. It is 3:25. I need a couple minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back and pick up our agenda for the remainder of the afternoon. Eric Reed?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I got to be quick because I have to leave. And I want to just really quickly address the next agenda item if I could. If you don't want to do it, that's fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So first I want to thank Dr. Ford. I've heard her presentation twice already, so the third time would be the charm for me, I suppose. Her and her teams did a great job. The document itself lays out a lot of alternatives. But I'm anticipating a motion by Mr. Hughes when it comes to the time in that particular agenda item, and I fully support that motion. And I won't be able to give you any rationale, but the reality of it is the task is to get a draft timeline, a draft outline of the project to us for our April cycle. That draft outline is going to be critically important to figure out or start to figure out how much money we're going to need to do it. And the sooner we get an idea, the better off we're going to be. So I just, that to me, we're going to keep the momentum going, but I personally need to understand what it was going to be required to make those vessels suitable to do the work, and then start trying to figure out how to fund that project. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everybody. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Eric, and have safe travels home. Okay, 10-minute break. Come back at 3:35. We'll pick up the remainder of the afternoon. Okay, if everyone can start to take your seats. We're going to kick things back off in about a minute or two. Okay, let's go ahead and pick things up from where we left off. We are joined by Dr. Catherine Ford. And I think while Eric has heard this presentation, what did he say, 3 times? I think that this might be new to some of us. So we're looking forward to your presentation, Catherine. And whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, council members. Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Ford. I'm the Population Ecosystem Monitoring and Analysis Division Director at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in Woods Hole. PMAD is the division that includes the Ecosystem Surveys branch that's run by Peter Chase. It includes several major fishery independent surveys that the Science Center runs, including the Multi-Species Bottom Trawl Survey, Clam Survey, Scallop Survey, and the Gulf of Maine Shrimp Survey. So today I'm here to talk to you about an industry-based trawl survey white paper that we wrote this fall. This work was supported by a large group of people, most notably the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel, which is a joint Mid-Atlantic and New England Council advisory panel. NTAP is meeting tomorrow, so I will be giving this presentation a little lengthier tomorrow. So you're all welcome to tune in and listen to it again. And maybe you could beat Eric at some point in the number of times you'll see this presentation. So I'm here to present the white paper that was developed in response to the Council and Commission motions from September and October in 2023. This white paper outlines an industry-based survey that is complementary to the multi-species bottom trawl survey that we do at the Science Center. The multi-species bottom trawl survey, I use the acronym of BTS. Sometimes I just say trawl survey. It's operated by the Science Center. The purpose of this survey is to monitor ecosystem changes and trends in abundance, distribution, and life history for demersal fish. We provide information for 63 stocks and collect more than 600 species. This is a shelf scale survey. It goes from North Carolina to Nova Scotia. It predates the Hague line. The major products that this informs is the status of the ecosystem reports, our stock assessments, and climate assessments done at National Marine Fisheries Service. This survey is done over 120 survey days per year. We do 60 days in the fall and 60 days in the spring. The way it is planned is over a 3-month period in each season. So we take 90 days in the spring and we sample 60 of those days, and same for the fall. The platform that we use for this survey is the Henry B. Bigelow. The Bigelow has a sister ship called the Pisces, and both of these ships are run by the line agency OMAO, or Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. For those of you who aren't familiar with how NOAA is organized, that is a separate line agency within NOAA. The National Marine Fisheries Service is another line agency, National Weather Service, et cetera. The trawl gear that we use on this survey was designed with NTAP. This survey gear is also used on other surveys in the region, most notably NEAMAP. This survey is a really substantial scientific undertaking. We have 5 biologists and 3 gear technicians for 8 full-time people working on this year round. When we sail and do the survey, we're sailing with 15 scientific staff. We sample over 3-week legs right now. We do 3-week legs, 24/7 sampling. The survey staff also support research efforts, including taxonomic studies, restratification analyses, catch efficiency research, and other modernization projects. Some key points I'd like to make is that this is an extremely valuable survey for fisheries and marine ecosystem monitoring. This is a globally recognized survey in terms of both its value and its longevity. And one of our key goals with this survey is to have consistency in trawl performance. So consistency is really important because it allows us to have less uncertainty in our estimates that are coming out of the survey results. So on the left-hand side, I'm showing 2 images of a trawl. The top image has the trawl right along the seafloor. All the fish are going into the net. The bottom image shows the trawl slightly off of the seafloor and some of the fish are escaping the net. So what we try to do is ensure consistent survey protocols. So we have a standard operating procedures manual, and we establish these protocols to make sure that every tow is within certain ranges to make sure that it's comparable year to year, because we're looking for these trends over time. If a tow does not meet the standards that are set in the protocol, then the tow will be rejected and retowed. On the right-hand side is an image that's showing a consistent time series. It's actually showing an inconsistent time series. This is just a hypothetical time series. I pulled it off of Google. It's humidity data. And you can see that there's a gap in the time series between the orange line and the green line. When we have a gap in our time series, we use a variety of analytical tools to fill that gap. So we use extrapolation tools to fill the gap. When we use those tools, it always introduces some level of uncertainty. In some cases, we're really good at this. We know a lot about the given species or the given data set, and we can have a lot of confidence in our extrapolation. But in other cases, we're a lot less certain. The larger the gap, of course, the more extrapolation that's happening and the more uncertainty is introduced. So this isn't always a big problem, but it can be. And so in general, what we try to do is make sure that our data collections are absolutely as clean as possible. So we don't have to do any of the corrections after we've done the collection. So that's our goal, is to be as consistent as we can. We do have some concerns about the Bigelow. The Bigelow is the platform on which we do this survey. We've been using it since 2009. Before we used the Bigelow, we used the Albatross from the beginning of the survey up to 2008. So this graph here shows the Bigelow days that we've been doing since the Bigelow started in 2009. A typical survey for us, we plan about 370 stations, and it's normal for us to sample between 330 and 350 stations in a given survey season. So this graph shows years on the x-axis, and it shows the number of valid tows on the y-axis. The spring survey is the solid green line. The fall survey is the dotted orange line. And you can see that in the first half of the Bigelow years, performance was consistent. We had pretty consistent number of tows every season. And more recently, that performance has started to decline a little bit. So over 30 surveys that we've done, 30% of them have less than 300 stations that have been sampled. And the reasons why we've seen performance declines include late spring starts. So the Bigelow goes into dry dock over the winter time and repairs get delayed, and the start in the spring then gets delayed. We've had 3 surveys affected by COVID. Certainly in 2020, the worst of those effects were seen. The spring survey got out there, but then had to be recalled, and then the fall survey was canceled. We've had staffing limitations. It's a large crew that runs the ship, and sometimes we run into staffing limitations with the available crews to do usually the deck work. And then we've had 2 ship repairs over the time series of the Bigelow. One was an engine failure, and I'm not remembering the other one right now. So we've already had these unintended loss sea days, and we're expecting more platform impacts coming up. So notably, we have offshore wind development happening. The Bigelow will not be able to sample inside of offshore wind farms the way they're being designed right now. There's a midlife refit that's planned for September of 2027 to September of 2028. And then ultimately, we'll be dealing with end of life. So one thing that NTAP initiated last summer in July was a working group to develop a contingency plan for the Bigelow. This working group kicked off in September of 2023, and the term of reference is to describe vessel platforms that can support completing this Northeast Fisheries Science Center spring and fall bottom trawl survey when the Bigelow is unavailable. This plan includes 4 options that we're looking at right now. And the first is the Pisces. The Pisces is the sister ship to the Bigelow. It has been used in the past. It was used in 2017 to fill in for the Bigelow when it had an engine failure. The second option is a Northeast Fisheries Science Center vessel that's calibrated to the Bigelow. Right now, the Science Center runs the Gloria Michelle, and the Gloria Michelle is reaching its end of life. So we're interested in replacing that with a slightly larger vessel that we would be able to tow off of and potentially calibrate to Bigelow. The third is an industry-based vessel that's calibrated to the Bigelow. And the fourth is an industry-based survey that is not calibrated to the Bigelow, but operated as a parallel separate survey, complementary. So the white paper addresses this fourth option under this contingency plan. Setting the goals for this project became important. There are a lot of reasons people are interested in an industry-based survey. So to try to make it clear what we're accomplishing with this particular white paper, the goals were set up as under 3 major themes. We have science for management, operations, and industry involvement. Under science for management, we're trying to improve our data products by improving survey data consistency. For operations, which is the group of topics associated with actually running the survey, our goal is to be consistent. And the way we can use this particular effort to improve our consistency is by adding resilience to the existing survey. And then we're very interested in industry involvement to improve the soundness of the science that we're doing, make sure we're answering the right questions. We want to be transparent, and we do want to improve trust through collaboration with the industry. So the white paper was developed over the course of the fall. There were 2 drafts of the paper, each of which went through a review period. The first draft was reviewed internally at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and by the NTAP working group, which includes a few external stakeholder representatives. We allowed a few other folks to participate in the working group. The second draft was reviewed by a larger group of people. It was both internal and external reviewers. We had folks from NIMS headquarters, our National Survey Coordinator reviewed it, Alaska Fisheries Science Center, Northwest Fisheries Science Center. Both of those science centers run industry-based surveys. The second draft was also provided to the executive directors of the councils. And in addition to the document review periods, we had 2 meetings with the NTAP working group and 1 meeting with the POP-DI branch at the Science Center to discuss this initiative. So the basic description of what's been proposed in the white paper, because this is a complementary survey, a parallel survey to the bottom trawl survey, we use the same geographic range, seasons, strata, and station allocation as the Northeast Fisheries Science Center survey. The design aims for 24-hour sampling, but one of the big questions that we need to work on moving forward is determining if a 12-hour per vessel approach is feasible. I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. For gear, we use the same gear as the bottom trawl survey with flexibility on doors and no auto trawls. They're not common in the fleet here. Net mensuration for tow evaluation would be required. Sampling would include sampling for the station data, water quality data, gear performance, and net spread data. For the catch, we would focus on the total number, biomass, composition, age, sex, maturity, and stomach contents at least being preserved. and determining additional biological sampling of the catch needs to be done during the pilot survey. This was a really interesting conversation throughout the last few months. The industry, through NTAP members, really requested what might be called a minimum viable product for biological sampling. So if we could simplify the sampling to make sure that we can be as flexible regarding the types of vessels that we're using, that was the request. With the basic description of the vessels would need to be appropriate length and horsepower to sample in open ocean conditions and tow gear at 3 knots for 20 minutes. They would need sufficient winch capabilities for towing the standardized gear package across the survey area, necessary deck space for processing stations and catch processing, capacity for CTD casts to 200 fathoms. One of the considerations is whether or not to place the CTD on the trawl net instead. That might be possible. Appropriate vessel crew for the length of the sampling day, space for 1 spare net, although if longer trips are being planned, 2 or 3 spare nets might be necessary. We use 3 on the bottom trawl survey for our 3-week legs. The vessel needs to be capable of using the appropriate doors to maintain the net spread. And if 24-hour operations are being done, we need the appropriate number of bunks for vessel and science crews. Data management is a significant consideration. It needs to be thought of at the beginning of the survey. Electronic data collection and management would be included. Availability to stock assessments 4 weeks after the survey concludes would be the goal. And then this third bullet, which sounds like maybe it contradicts the second bullet, the data, what I'm talking about here is the data would be available for use in stock assessments after 3 to 10 years of continuous survey effort. So bullet number 2, we're talking about when the survey comes in, we QA/QC the data, we push it off to end users. Bullet number 3 is about when you can actually use this time series in an assessment. For program management, the way we wrote it in the white paper was a third-party operated program management approach, very similar to how NEAMAP is done. But other options are presented in the paper and their pros and cons are briefly identified. So that's something that is still open for consideration. So the key differences that we have here between an industry-based survey as described in the white paper and the bottom trawl survey that we're running right now, the program management would rely on a third party. We'd have a potential use of multiple vessels, potential use of different doors. Smaller wire diameter came up as a key difference. We use a 1-inch diameter on the bottom trawl survey, and the fleet typically has a 7/8 inch wire. No auto trawls. Auto trawls are not common in the fleet here. One option would be to create a system in which we outfit the vessels entirely and we go ahead and add auto trawls into the sampling design. That is something that the Alaska Fisheries Science Center is moving to right now. They actually have auto trawls and don't use them, and they want to move toward using them. So that might be something we want to consider in more detail. And then specific towing protocols, the protocols we have in existence for the bottom trawl survey aren't appropriate for every single vessel out there. So in a pilot period, we'd really need to explore the specific towing protocols that would be necessary for the vessels that are doing the work. As I mentioned, biological sampling was a kind of a debate in the group. So the industry members asked for less biological sampling to simplify or maximize the use of any type of vessel. But a lot of the scientists who are operating these surveys on industry vessels really felt that the full complement of biological sampling could be accommodated. So that's something that needs a little more work. Plankton sampling is in the same umbrella. We took plankton sampling out for now, but it certainly can be done on industry boats. It's a matter of maybe figuring out how we would do that. And acoustic sampling was also removed. No acoustic Doppler current profiler and no EK80. These are expensive instruments, and that adds a significant cost to the survey, especially if we're dealing with multiple vessels. It's also a significant lift in terms of the data management. These are pretty large data streams, and so we'd need to consider that as well. And I mentioned the 12, 24-hour day very briefly. Right now, we do a 24-hour day, and we do have species that we sample that have diel cycles. If you go to a daytime or a 12-hour day kind of sampling regime, that could not sample all of those cycles. So you maybe could do like a midnight to noon, or noon to midnight kind of arrangement, or you could just go to daytime sampling. So those are questions that we need to look at in some more detail. If we went to daytime only, what do you lose? Is it logistically possible to do, to split that 24 hours over a day-night period? Those are things we still need to work out. So I added this slide after the New England Council meeting where I presented these slides, just to clarify that the sample data product here is a second time series. So we have the bottom trawl survey time series now, and this survey would add a second time series. This is manufactured. I made this in Excel with, just my own numbers. So this is just hypothetical data here. You have year of the survey on the x-axis and number of, a metric of some sort. So you could say biomass on the y-axis. Bottom trawl survey could be the blue line, and this industry-based survey could be the orange line. And so the blue line, you can see a couple of gaps in the time series. Those would be seasons that we weren't able to sample. Same with the orange line. Hopefully those gaps wouldn't happen at the same time, and the two surveys would be able to be kind of providing information in years where the other survey doesn't operate. So what goals does the IBS address? So for science for management, we're increasing the resiliency of the primary time series for many assessments. For operations, we do think this could be a potential replacement if the Bigelow can't survey in a given season. And for industry involvement, we do have industry providing input to the design and operations, and industry vessels could be used as platforms. We're certainly designing it around the availability and setup of those vessels that are in this fleet. So for some of the next steps, for me, the most important thing is to finish the contingency plan. So this was option number 4, the complementary survey. We still need to flesh out options 1, 2, and 3. So option number 1 is the Pisces. The Pisces is a sister vessel to the Bigelow, and that vessel right now is not ready to trawl. So we need to make improvements with OMAO to the Pisces to make sure that it's ready to go. The next time the Bigelow will be in dry dock is the winter of 2026. And so we need to focus on getting all of the pieces in place for that option to be viable. Options number 2 and 3 are different vessels calibrated to the Bigelow, and these two options need to be fleshed out. They're kind of more along the lines of creating a single time series. So having something that would just fill in as needed when the Bigelow is unavailable. And there are a lot of complexities with those options. We don't know how feasible they are at this point, but they need to be explored in more detail. The second next step, which is very, very important, is exploring connections with offshore wind. So right now, we have sort of a grassroots group that's forming around asking questions and thinking about considerations with our surveys and how they inform assessments. We want to continue supporting this group, and I think it would be a lost opportunity if we're discussing industry-based surveys without considering whether or not they can operate inside of wind farms. So I think we're very interested in pursuing what those options look like and what those designs look like. Most importantly, what do those survey designs look like? And then the third next step, I think it's possible for us to be planning out a pilot survey that would be on the water in fiscal year 2025, probably summer of 25, maybe early fall of 25, to start working out some of the kinks. So the real question right now is the design issues. And then we have some operational kinks to work out in that pilot survey. So thank you all for having me here today. I realize it's late in the afternoon. I appreciate your attention. Happy to take any questions, and I will be around later too.
Thanks, Catherine, for your presentation, and I'll look to the members of the council for any comments or questions. Sonny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that information. It was really helpful. And I think you touched on it about the nighttime and daytime surveys. And I know from experience, and there's probably some in this room that could collaborate, that sometimes you could tow in the daytime and catch nothing and come back to the same spot at nighttime and actually fill the nets up. And how do you, figure that out?
Was that a question? Yeah, what we would propose and what's in the white paper is 24-hour sampling. So you'd be using vessels that could accommodate a 24-hour sampling plan. Another option might be if you're using smaller vessels that can't bunk people, for example, you would figure out a way to do a half day, half night for those vessels. One of the concerns, we don't want to just do all day and all night with separate vessels because you don't want to introduce too much bias to your sampling. So we would want one vessel to be doing half day, half night, and the other vessel to be doing half day, half night. So it's pretty complicated. It's not that it can't be done, but the more complexities you introduce, the more risk there is at not getting it done right.
Yep, thank you. With the last thing we just talked about, nothing's simple. I'm beginning to learn that.
Thank you. Peter Hughes.
Thank you, Catherine. I heard this last week also. After Q&A, I do have a motion that I'd like to put. Okay, so Stephen, if I could ask you to put that motion up. So during my liaison report yesterday, I had reported out that ASFMC had made a very similar motion, and this would be a mirror motion to what the New England Fishery Management Council did last week after the presentation. And if I may, I'll read it into the record. Thank you. I move to recommend to task the Northeast Troll Advisory Panel, NTAP, and the NTAP Bigelow Contingency Plan Working Group to develop an outline detailing a plan to conduct a multi-vessel industry-based survey pilot program to test the viability of the program presented in the draft proposed plan for a novelty industry-based multi-species bottom trawl survey on the Northeast U.S. continental shelf. White paper with a particular focus on refining Section 2 survey design elements, considering the NEMAP protocols and current industry platform capabilities. Second paragraph, a progress report on the draft plan should be presented in time for further discussion at the April 2024 meetings of the NEFMC, the MAFMC, and the spring 2024 meeting of the ASMFC. That's my motion.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. And that will not get read again. So I'm suggesting that we don't amend it or change it at all. We'll leave it like it is, but I need to ask for a second. Robert Rule would like to second that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Peter, I'll ask you for justification, rationale.
Yeah, so we heard briefly from the chair of the New England Council, it's important to understand what the baselines are going to be moving forward and what the costs are going to be associated with this. So the more information that we can get to help inform us and others who are interested in participating in this work, the better. So thank you.
Bobby, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it's just to keep things progressing on in a timely fashion.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any other questions for Catherine before we conclude this item on today's agenda? Michelle?
I'm assuming that, that NTAP can meet this time frame for providing a draft plan for further discussion for both councils. You don't have a look of concern on your face about meeting that time frame, so I just want to confirm.
You're the first person to ask me that question. I do have concerns. But the way it's written, yes, a progress report and a presentation can be made in April. And I'm speaking on behalf of NTAP, which may be stretching it a little bit, like I'm not the only NTAP person, right? So NTAP is meeting tomorrow and they will discuss, this motion was passed at ASMFC, New England Council, now here. So I think we'll have a better sense once NTAP can discuss it and think through what can be accomplished between now and April and who would do what.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, Catherine, I think it's your calm demeanor and your big smile, I think, that makes it seem as if you're not worried or stressed out about it. But I know that it's a big task and appreciate all the efforts going into it. John Hare, did you have anything? No, I'm going to pass. Okay. I do have a member of the public who would like to ask a question or provide comment. James Fletcher. Go ahead, James.
Ms. Ford, in an earlier meeting, I brought up replacing the Bigelow with an aluminum hull vessel to aid in using electroshock in the surveys. Has there been any research by anyone at NOAA or at the Science Center into using electric shock for the surveys? There are already electric shock trawls being used in Europe commercially, and there are electroshock surveys being done in fresh water. But having a hull that was aluminum is needed for both types of surveys. If a private enterprise was willing to purchase a aluminum hull vessel in the 200, 210 foot range, is there any chance that NOAA or National Marine Fisheries would lease that boat for a given number of years, 10 or 15 years? Thank you.
Dr. Hare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. Yeah, I remember this did come up at a previous Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council meeting, and, we engaged in communications, and you had put me in touch with a company to explore this option, but they indicated to me that they were no longer interested in exploring the option. So if there are other connections that you can help make, that would be wonderful. They do use a beam trawl in Europe to fish commercially, but I don't think we use beam trawls here in the Northeast U.S. So that would be something we could look at if anyone's interested in moving for a beam trawl. It would certainly be good for flatfish. So that's something we could think about. And then, your request about leasing something for 10 to 15 years, that's hard for the government to do. We typically do not enter into long-term lease agreements like that for a vessel. So I'd want to, talk with you a lot more about that before anyone committed to buying a 200-foot aluminum hull vessel, thinking that they could lease it to the government for an electrofishing survey. But it's an interesting idea. We're still considering it, but we haven't really found anyone who is sort of working with us to carry it forward.
Okay, thanks, John. And I'll just state, so a colleague of mine that I went to graduate school with many years ago is working and is in the process of developing the a saltwater electrofishing outfit that I think could change the way we do some work in the nearshore water. So I'd love to talk to you about that too at some point. Yeah. Sure, of course. I'm not sure I was supposed to say that yet, but I haven't seen him in 20 years, so he doesn't know where I am. Right. Okay. Anything else for Catherine? Okay. Seeing none, Catherine, thank you very much. I need about 2 or 3 minutes to get set up for the awards presentations that we have. So please don't go anywhere. Just need to clean up shop up here a little bit and bring the awards out. And so just stay tuned. Give me about 3 or 5 minutes, and we'll start the awards presentation. Thanks. If I could ask everyone to please take your seats. Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're going to move into our awards presentations, and typically in February, we do a number of different awards, one of them being the Rick C. Savage Award. It's customary that we do that at our February meeting. The recipient of that award was not able to make it to this meeting, so we're going to have to reschedule, and we'll let the council know when that award will be given out sometime during this year. We need to coordinate with the individual who's receiving that award to see when they're available to make it. And I also want to mention that after this presentation, there's hospitality this evening. For everyone's invited to attend. It's in Chris's room 1516, and you're all welcome to come up and relax for a little bit before going out to dinner. So wanted to clear that off, get that off the deck before we present a new award. And so today, I have the privilege of presenting a new council award for the first time. The James A. Rule Cooperative Research Award is named in memory of Captain Jimmy Rule, who will also be the award's first recipient. Jimmy's son, Robert, will be accepting the award on behalf of his father. So Robert's here with me. And if you guys want to take a look at the screen behind us, we've got some pictures of Jimmy throughout the years. Jimmy was a commercial fisherman, a 3-term council member, and a friend to many of us. He was also a pioneer in the field of cooperative research, and this award is intended to honor that legacy. As many of you know, Jimmy was instrumental in the development of the Northeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program, which many of us refer to as NEMAP. And since 2007, the Mid-Atlantic Nearshore Trawl Survey has been conducted by VIM scientists on board Jimmy's vessel, the fishing vessel Durana R. NEMAP has improved the assessments of several Mid-Atlantic and Southern New England species, including black sea bass, butterfish, longfin squid, longfin squid, scup, and summer flounder. The NEMAP survey has not only helped fill gaps in survey data for nearshore waters, but has also raised industry confidence in the data used for management decisions. These successes would not have been possible without Jimmy's leadership and the tireless dedication from the first pilot survey in 2006 until his passing last year. Through his long-term involvement in the NEMAP survey, Jimmy demonstrated a powerful potential for cooperative research to build trust and buy-in among fishermen while improving fisheries data. He believes strongly that fishermen can play a valuable role in fisheries data collection and that their on-the-water knowledge should be considered in management decisions. The council created this award as a way to recognize and highlight the important work that scientists and fishermen are doing together through cooperative research. The award will be given to individuals or groups who have demonstrated exceptional collaboration, dedication, or innovation in their research efforts, or in recognition of cooperative research projects that have significantly contributed to the understanding or management of Mid-Atlantic fisheries. With that, and in front of Jimmy's family, his friends, and his colleagues, it is my honor to recognize Captain Jimmy Rule as the first recipient of the James A. Rule Cooperative Research Award. And I want to thank his son, Bobby, for accepting the award on his behalf. Congratulations. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Bobby, and then if anyone else wants to offer thoughts or tell a story, the floor will be yours. But Bobby, congratulations. Here you go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's funny, I mean, Dad never did anything for accolades, and he, in one sense, shied away from it. I know he'd be extremely proud of this award being established in his honor. He was a very, very firm believer in cooperative research. His ties with cooperative research were longer than his ties with me. Which is, it's the truth. The other day, I was actually going through some paperwork and come across a published paper from Dr. Frank Carey and Dr. Jack Casey when they went out and did acoustic tagging on swordfish in 1973. I didn't come along until 77. But he firmly believed that any cooperative effort that was a cooperative collaborative research project that was put together really brought together the best of both worlds, and that there was no way, it was the best way to get a good solid product. And not only that, you built relationships that lasted a lifetime. We've had the honor, he had the great honor, and me by osmosis, because I was so close to him, I was able to form relationships with a lot of really, really great academia. You know, anywhere from, I'm fortunate enough, I do have a good relationship with Jack Casey, cooperative research, former director, and current director Anna Mercer and John Hoey. The list, you know, Dr. Rob Latour, and then Dr. Jim Garland. I mean, it's just, you can't go wrong with a cooperative research, you know, approach. It seems that you have the advantage of taking a problem and looking at it from two completely different sets of lenses. So I just think that you know, cooperative research it's for a long time it's been an underutilized tool, but I think it's something that going forward that definitely it needs to be used more. And in the last few years, quite a few projects have come along through cooperative research, and we've seen what they bring to the table and the utility in them. And like I say, I'm very honored to be able to receive this, you know, for him. I'm glad for him that he got it, and I hope possibly someday maybe I'll be able to achieve something like this on my own. Thank you.
I'll ask if anyone else here in attendance would like to offer any thoughts or say a few words. Please.
Okay. Bad when the button doesn't light up. My name's David Gaithel. I was on the New England Council at the same time Jimmy was on the Mid-Atlantic, 2004 to 2013. And we both were highliners, National Fisherman Highliners in 2004. And we worked together on cooperative research really right up until he died. And one of the stories I wanted to tell you is that Jimmy was a person who wanted to fix things. And I felt the same way. And he called me up, and usually early, like 5, 6 in the morning. Wouldn't say who it was. He just launched into a speech. We got to fix this. And we go back and forth and formulate a plan, you know, hatch a scheme to fix it. And I hope you all remember that. That was his legacy, was fixing things. And I think it's all important that everybody know it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi, everyone. Anna Mercer, Chief of the Cooperative Research Branch at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. For those of you who are at the summit on Monday, I will hold it together today. Jimmy was recognized at the Northeast Cooperative Research Summit on Monday as well. I just wanted to provide one story, one Jimmy story that really, for me, made an impact on me and my professional career. I had the great fortune and privilege of sailing with Jimmy and Bobby for many days on the Durana R very early in my professional career. And it took many days to get to that point where I was invited up into the wheelhouse. But one of the things that I learned that stuck with me for my entire career from Jimmy is that you don't know what you don't know until you know what you don't know. And Jimmy really took me under his wing very early in my career. He sat me down and taught me how to calculate a bridle angle when I wasn't understanding what he meant by the trawl gear performance. He made me a model of a net so that I would understand what it meant to split the bag. And for me as a scientist, coming up with many different types of education and lots of hours in the classroom, those times in the wheelhouse with Jimmy and on the deck and on the phone have taught me just as much as any other type of education I have. And so I am greatly appreciative to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council for developing this award. And I know he is looking down on us and feeling a lot of pride that this is an award that will go on and his legacy will continue on through his family and through hopefully all of you around the table and many other scientists and fishermen across the region. So thank you and congratulations to Bobby and Jimmy. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, seeing no one else, I'll offer just one. So I'll be the first to admit I didn't know Jimmy that well. We engaged and interacted during meetings, but the one time I remember specifically was when I first took over as the chair of the council. We were in Virginia Beach, and I was leaving Virginia Beach, and I was on the bridge tunnel going for the next 3 or 4 hours. I wasn't going to see a human being down the peninsula there. It was kind of no man's land, and it was snowing and kind of bad weather. And the phone rang. I picked it up, and it was Jimmy. And he said, "I hear you're the new council chair." I said, "Yes, sir." Yeah, and he filled me in with everything he knew and what as Anna said, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. We spoke for hours on that call, and by the time it was done, I was back in Maryland and almost home. So I enjoyed, the opportunity to have that chance to learn from him. And as Anna mentioned, I know he's looking down on us. So I just thought I'd share that with you. And many of you probably have experienced something quite similar throughout the years. So thank you, and thank you again, Bobby, for accepting this award on your father's behalf. I think we probably need to take a few pictures, and then we'll go upstairs and go to Chris's room for hospitality. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.